I'm from Canada. Canada!
Welcome everyone, I'm Richard Krause with a list of Canadian dramas more flavorful than a bag of ketchup chips. Coming up, I have the story of a mystical child on a remote island off the coast of Newfoundland and Labrador, a journey to justice for Christopher Plummer, a tale of a young woman who went from the wilderness of Alberta to the wild runways of the fashion world, and a young Indigenous woman guided by spirits to exact revenge against a vicious government agent. First stop, Nova Scotia. To me, the still shot of two teens, one wearing an Edward Baird t-shirt hitchhiking on a two-lane highway, is a powerfully nostalgic Canadian image. I grew up in 1970s-era Nova Scotia where hundreds of kids, me included, hitchhiked on roads big and small. The image is iconic, a sentimental picture of a simpler time brought to vivid life in Weirdos, Bruce McDonald and Daniel McIver's sweet coming-of-age story. Set in 1976, Weirdos puts McDonald back on the road. The hardcore logo director has a way with road movies, and here he keeps the story of Kit, a bored Antigonish 15-year-old in constant motion. Kit wants a different life, one far, far away from the small-town existence offered by his dad and grandmother. With girlfriend Alice in tow, Kit hangs out his thumb hitchhiking towards change. As the pair make their way to Kit's mother Laura's house, she's an artist who claims to know Andy Warhol, the nature of the teen's relationship is challenged as the young man grapples with his sexuality.
Where are you going?
I'm going to live with my mom.
Oh, okay. And be cool. I know them.
So why are you going to Sydney?
I'm actually going
There's a party on Dominion Beach.
No way. Let's go to Sydney. Yes!
Finally!
With some melancholy and much humor, Weirdos expertly strings together the small moments that make up Kit's life. Warm, affectionate, and wallpapered with a K-Tel soundtrack of 70s CanCon, it follows his journey to self-discovery. The young leads, Dylan Authors and Julia Sarah Stone, do most of the heavy lifting here, handling in naturalistic, understated performances, but it's Molly Parker and Alan Hocko who provide the emotional sparks. As absent mother Laura, Parker has the film's flashiest role. She's a dysfunctional grande dame with an imagined connection to Warhol and a head full of dreams. Her screen time amounts to little more than an extended cameo, but Parker's work is so vivid, so alive, it feels as though we've known her for years. The Republic of Doyle's Alan Hocko is quieter, but poignant as the father who must explain himself in one of the film's best scenes. Weirdos is the story of outsiders, but as there are more people outside the circle than in, it really is a universal story of self-examination, one that can be enjoyed even if you've never hitchhiked or worn an Edward Baird t-shirt. I spoke with screenwriter Daniel McIver and director Bruce McDonald.
Bruce, as he does, he writes me a letter with a pen and paper and a stamp, and he puts it in the mail.
Because you don't email, do you, Bruce?
I have a guy named Patrick Whistler who helps me with the email.
Now what Bruce is doing, didn't do this at the time, but now his thing is he writes the letter and then he scans it and has it emailed.
If it has to get there really fast.
If it has to get there quickly. But anyway, so he asked me for a chamber piece, but that was another thing. This time I approached him with an idea.
Yeah.
And it was, the idea was about, it was a very simple idea. It was about, I wanted to do a boy runs away from home, his father to his mother, and then realizes something, and then goes and calls his father and asks him to pick him up and take him home. That was
the pitch to me, right?
That was the pitch,
and I loved it.
And he said, "Yeah." So then we met. So we went. We're friends, and so I went for dinner. I went for dinner at his place, and he had invited a producer. And so he said, and Bruce pitch it. So I pitched it, and the producer asked a whole lot of producery questions,
right.
And I have a bit of a thing about producers. I love them. They're wonderful. But this is the thing about producers. It's kind of like if you're trying to grow some corn, and you plant some corn in some dirt and you show it to producer and they go, "I can't taste the corn." And you're like, "Well, you got to grow it." And then the thing grows and then they grab it out. They don't even peel it or anything. They start eating it. And they're like, "It doesn't taste like corn." And you're like, "Well, you got to, take the stalk off and everything." And then they try eating it. It's like, "You got to cook it now." And then it's like, then you got to put butter on it. I mean, they want the corn.
Salt.
right away. Anyway, so the producer was kind of looking for the corn, and I thought, I'm not doing this anymore. So I said to Bruce, you know what? I'm done. I can't. The theater, I love theater, and film is nice, but I got to go. Anyway, and then he wrote me this beautiful...
That's when I wrote you the letter.
Yeah, that's when you wrote me this beautiful letter, and he just described... It makes me it chokes me up, actually. He wrote this beautiful letter just describing... Because the hitchhiking was part of the deal. And he described, like, what you would hear on the road.
Right.
Like, what you would hear in that, like, at that time when you were hitchhiking, and, like, how the bugs and the sound of the heat and anyway. And it was so beautiful, and I just thought, all right, the hell with it, I'll do it. So then
I'm glad you did, Daniel.
Then I started writing, and then, of course, there's many drafts, and then you're trying to get some corn to grow, and then eventually... you
and then Bruce comes along and puts the salt on it.
That's right.
That's right. That's
and
right.
the salt and the butter.
That's right. Yes.
And so a story like this, it is, I think, beautiful in its simplicity. Tell me, Bruce, a little bit, story aside, just making the feel of this film, getting the feel for 1976 in Nova Scotia.
Well, as Daniel was suggesting or telling you guys, the first kind of notion for me was summertime. Yeah. Hot summer beginning, what to do with summer. I always love music in summer. I love music on AM radio and driving in a car and the wind going. So all those little elements were really appealing, not growing up in Nova Scotia, but having hitchhiked through Nova Scotia. Right. I kind of instantly connected with these elements that Daniel had put forward. And I love the idea that there's a TV element in it too, because it is 1976 in July 3rd and 4th. There's something going on across the border in the United States called the Bicentennial, the biggest party to date, I guess. And so everywhere these kids go, in people's houses and things, there's America's on TV, but Canada's on the radio. And this was probably not that long after the CRTC gave a huge push to Canadian music by saying radio stations need to play a certain amount of Canadian music. So there was this kind of beautiful flourishing of all these artists and bands, and I mean people that had maybe been there and were hopefully going to go for it anyway, but we got to dip into Patsy Gallant and the Stampeders and Crowbar and April Wine and Andy Kim and Murray McLaughlin and
the Murray McLaughlin song. It's so great.
That's such a great song.
The
song we're talking about is Murray McLaughlin's Down by the Henry Moore, which is such a perfect kind of... It's the most Toronto song ever.
It's the most Toronto song ever, but it's also, for me, as I was watching it, and it doesn't give anything away to say that this song plays at the end of the film. And it is, for me, melancholy, but still really joyful at the same time.
That's right.
And I don't know exactly what the word is to describe how that song made me feel, but I hadn't heard it in ages. Yeah. And I was watching the movie, and the scene that's happening, looking in through the window at that scene, just made me happy, sad while I was watching it.
I mean, joyous melancholy. Maybe we've just nailed what the Canadian identity is.
Maybe that's
a kind of joyous melancholy, isn't it? Maybe that's sort of what we're made of, sort of, maybe.
Why for Canada?
Canada!
Set in 1976 on the Red Crow Mi'kmaq Reservation, Rhymes for Young Ghouls is the self-assured debut feature from the late great director Jeff Barnaby. The story of 15-year-old Ayla, an Indigenous girl guided by spirits to exact revenge against a vicious government agent after she is moved into the reserve's residential school, has, according to the Los Angeles Times review, a surprising amount of tenderness woven into the fabric of violence, as well as a good measure of magic realism to keep the gritty story engaging.
The day I found my mother dead, I aged by 1,000 years. If you're good at one thing, apply it to everything.
Where'd she learn how to do all that?
You can turn anything into an art form.
You were supposed to take care of her, Burner, not her take care of you.
You even know your girl, man? She's gonna be eating people after the apocalypse.
This is what brings my people together. The art of forgetfulness.
There is much to recommend in Rhymes for Young Ghouls. Ayla is an appealing heroine who inspired the creation of the Ayla test, a litmus test used to analyze representation of Indigenous female characters. There's sardonic humor and grit in the storytelling, topped by a wicked soundtrack. Best of all, it showcases the talent of director Jeff Barnaby, who sadly passed away in 2022. I spoke with Jeff Barnaby on the film's release in 2013.
Two of your favorite comic book heroes, Batman and Conan the Barbarian, and you sort of you tied this back into the film in a way that I thought was interesting. Can you explain to me how they might relate or how they may have influenced the movie?
Well, they're both anti-heroes, and depending on which Conan or Batman you're talking about, the cinematic one or the comic one, or the one that's in written word. Right. They're all kind of different canons, but they share this idea of not being above physical violence in order to kind of rectify a situation. They both lost their parents. They're both kind of vigilantes. Particularly with Conan, we kind of follow the storyline of the first movie with Schwarzenegger, and that, just kind of religious cult comes along and destroys his family, and then he kind of goes out searching for them and then kind of destroys the cult. And that's more or less the model that we use for Rhymes. I mean, albeit very loosely, kind of like the way Scorsese says he used the searchers for Taxi Driver. I mean, it's pretty broad strokes, and you kind of got to see it, or you kind of got to have it pointed out to you to see it.
Do you consider yourself a product of the popular culture that you received via comic books and television and movies? And is that just sort of, all kind of floating around in your head, waiting to be formed and repurposed into something else? Oh,
for sure. I mean, you kind of just answered the question. Mm-hmm. And I grew up kind of being saturated in everything, right? Like comic books. I remember my stepmom was going to university at the time, so she was bringing home all these really great, like, English poetry books, like the T.S. Eliot's and the kind of Robert Frost. So I really began to appreciate art at a very early age, and it's kind of a weird it's kind of a weird situation to be in on a reserve, because there isn't necessarily there's an appreciation for art, but not necessarily in the sense that you see in most Western culture, where really good artists are revered and in a lot of kinds like totally lionized and almost made like these mythical godlike figures. You don't see a lot of that in our culture, so that kind of rubbed off on me, where I became like enamored by the Dalis and the Picassos and like the kind of really high art of the turn of last century. That's when I was fascinated with that time period, from like anywhere from like the early or the late 1800s to the early 1900s.
Tell me where the title came from.
It's from a book of poems called Rhymes for Young Ghouls. It's actually a book of kind of like these ghastly Halloween poems. And I remember finding this book in this old secondhand bookstore in the middle of Maine, like in the middle of the sticks in Maine,
right,
called the Chicken Barn. And it was around the time that I was writing the screenplay, and I remember thinking to myself, wow, that would be such a great title for a movie. And it kind of started from there.
We've been set up. We need to figure out a way to get this money back. So we're gonna break into St. D's and rob Popper.
Somebody let us in on your little plan to break into the school. Congratulations. You're in.
North of Normal tells the unlikely but true story of Sia Sunrise Person, from her off-the-grid beginnings in the wilderness of Alberta and British Columbia to the runways of the fashion world. Based on Person's 2014 memoir, North of Normal, a memoir of my wilderness childhood, my countercultural family, and how I survived both, the movie jumps in time between Sia's upbringing in the flower power 1970s and her reunion, after a long break, with her free-spirited mother Michelle in the 1980s. The story begins in Kootenay Plains, Alberta, on a commune run by Michelle's father, Papa Dick. Convinced that the wilderness would solve all their problems, the older man is a messianic figure in his rejection of the outside world. Michelle is 15 years old and pregnant with Sia. Sia's life changes when Michelle, after an endless stream of boyfriends, moves them to the city to be with her latest beau. Thrown into a strange new world, Sia relies on Papa Dick's philosophy, never give in to fear, and forges a new life and security for herself on the high-fashion runways of New York and Paris. I'm not going to hang around and wait for the world to give me a good life, she says. I have a good face, and I'm going to use it. The long, strange trip of Person's unconventional life is brought to life in a heartfelt film. Sarah Gadon embraces her character Michelle's warmth, but also her unpredictability. Michelle isn't a good mother, but she is Sia's only support system, and their thorny bond is nicely wrought, warts and all. North of Normal is a simple movie about a complicated relationship. It avoids most of the melodrama that could have flavored the story, although a hair-cutting scene comes very close. Instead, it chooses to allow the fine acting to reveal the hidden emotional scars of mother and daughter. I spoke with the film's director, Carly Stone, and star, Amanda Fix.
Who looks after you?
My mom does now.
Come on!
I was living with my grandparents in the Yukon for the last 6 years. I moved around a couple times with my mom and one of her boyfriends.
Carl and I love each other, and he's an Aries.
Fire! Stop the car! Stop the car!
Hold on!
Stop. Come on, Sia, we're going.
So why'd they break up? They all break up.
Here's Carly Stone and Amanda Fix, the director and star of North of Normal.
The mother-daughter story just totally grabbed me. The character of Michelle especially at first, I found her so interesting, and I hadn't seen a mother like that, or at least the way I wanted to portray her on screen before. So Sia and Michelle's relationship felt so fruitful, and I was very inspired by it.
Well, Amanda, tell me a little bit about playing Sia, because you're playing a real person, so
Right.
There's a responsibility, I suppose, that comes with that. It is a movie, but still, you know, she's going to watch it, and maybe she was even on set. So how did you feel about that?
I mean, it's a big undertaking to play a real life person, especially someone who went through so much in her life, especially even at such a young age. And I have no experience of going through anything that she did remotely. And so, it felt at first like a lot of pressure, but I was so down for the challenge because I read the script and I was blown away by it, and I read the memoir, and it's heartbreaking and beautiful. And I talked to Sia, and she was just like the sweetest about it. I don't know if someone was playing me ever, or other people who get played in films have put that much trust in someone, especially me, who I didn't have that much to show for me. You know, so she just gave me her blessing and just wanted to capture that essence, especially between Michelle and Sia, and so I felt really supported, even though it felt like a huge job, and it is a huge job. Yeah.
Well, portraying Michelle must have been a little fraught as the director, and you again are portraying a real person. And I think it would have been easy to vilify her in some ways. She wasn't a particularly good mother. I think admits that at some point during the film. Mm-hmm. But I thought that she was portrayed really empathetically as someone who had made some bad choices and that sort of set the rest of her life on a certain course. So tell me about finding that empathy in a character and creating that for the screen.
Yeah, when I started working on the project, I very much related to Sia. I related to her ambition and her desire to make something special out of her life. And obviously I didn't grow up off the grid or anything like that, but within the course of adapting and working on this project, I became a mother myself, and I had more empathy towards Michelle all of a sudden. I think Michelle is harsher in the book, and I knew I didn't want to go full in the dark directions as the book sometimes goes. for the film, but I thought it would be a more compelling thing to see on screen is here's this mother that you fall in love with, and she's so charming and she's so playful, and like, oh, don't you just love her? But then you catch yourself because you kind of start to feel bad for loving her. And I thought that was an interesting thing to play with. So I think it was my own experiences in motherhood that inspired me.
Next up, Adam Egoyan's Remember. Revenge is on Max's mind. After a lifetime of bringing Nazis to justice with the Simon Wiesenthal Center, he's now an octogenarian living in a senior's home confined to a wheelchair. An Auschwitz survivor, he has made it his life's work to find the man responsible for the murder of my family, he says. But time is running out, and there's one last name on the list, Rudy Kurlander. Trouble is, there are multiple Kurlanders who fit the profile. In the dying days of World War II, SS soldiers stole the identities of their victims, and 4 Rudys emerged in the aftermath. One is an alias for the man responsible for the deaths of Max's family. To track down and dispatch Kurlander, Max recruits Zev, played by Christopher Plummer, a 90-year-old widower from the seniors' home. Like Max, Zev was at Auschwitz, and as the last living survivors from the prison block, Max tells him, "You're the only person left who can recognize the face of the man who murdered our families." Despite a failing memory, Zev embarks on the search for Kurlander armed with a detailed letter from Max to remind him of the operation's details, and he also has a loaded Glock.
You are the only person who could still recognize the man who murdered our families. Do you remember what you said you would do when Ruth died? I have planned everything for you. You must follow these steps precisely. His name is Otto Wallisch. You must find him. You must kill him.
Remember is a road movie, a journey to justice. Along the way, we meet several Rudy Kurlanders, a neo-Nazi with a dog named Eva, and several very helpful hotel clerks. Despite the constant changing scenery and situations, the constant is Christopher Plummer in a remarkable performance as a man on a mission. Struggling, he methodically works his way through the list, years of anger bubbling under the surface. He's genteel but deeply wounded by events that he can now barely remember. Plummer conveys it all: confusion, anger, fear, resignation, and in one extraordinary scene, deep sorrow as he shares a tender moment with one of the Kurlanders. Egoyan parcels out the story carefully, building tension to an explosive climax. The thrills come with the search, but Remember's main buzz comes from Plummer's heartfelt and assured performance as a man struggling to reconcile the past with the present. I spoke with Adam Egoyan in 2015 on the film's release.
You've made, or you've chosen a difficult project for yourself here, in the sense that you have a main character who we need to be on side for.
Right.
Otherwise it's not going to work. But he's on a mission of revenge, which, on the surface could be, terrible things happen to an animal. There's all sorts of things seemingly stacked against him, and yet you stay with him.
Right.
Why is that?
Because he feels frail. Because he feels that he's not in complete control of his actions, and he feels like he is very vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Christopher Plummer does an extraordinary job of just playing the moment. We understand this person has no subtext. He's not capable, and it's a very unusual performance from that point of view. There's nothing he seems to be carrying other than this feeling of anger, but and we understand that anger. And so therefore we have nothing but affection and concern over Chris's journey.
When you were directing him, was there anything that you had to remind him? Because it is a different character. Mm-hmm. It is a character who doesn't have a sense of his past.
Right.
It is a character who is unlike anything I've seen Christopher Plummer play before in terms of vulnerability and things.
I think he's unlike, I think the character is unlike any character I've ever seen in terms of what he's dealing with, because we think that what defines him is this state of dementia, but then we come to understand without giving anything away, that it's actually trauma. But and that there's rather than him not knowing his past because of the dementia, which at the end of the day is short term. For someone who's still able to move around as much as he can, it's a relatively it starts from the present back. So it's what he's
reminded of things like when he sees the letter, he has enough wherewithal to
exactly.
go. Yeah, I got to read that thing. I remember I have to read that.
So he's not, it's early stages, but what he's really suffering from is trauma and selective, suppressed and repressed memory, which is a whole different process, and so what we did do was talk about who this person was and what was the arc of his life until he got to America, but that's not being played in the film. That's just something that we had to kind of consider, and it's a fascinating discussion to have, but it has very little to do with what he's playing because there's no subtext as such, as opposed to a character like Landau, who's all subtext, which and actually, like most of my characters are tormented by subtext or are replaying scenes over and over in their mind, and reeling from things that they're too aware of, and this, in that sense, it's a very different character.
And why Christopher Plummer? I mean, he's the right age, but there's more than that.
Yeah, there's a sense of there's a wonderful sense of kind of a lost nobility or a lost kind of grace and a lost, he comes from a different school, he comes from a different time, and I think we also kind of help kind of reflect on the types of roles he's played before, and certainly there's a gentility to him,
Here's more with the star of Remember, Christopher Plummer, talking about playing an elderly character. For me, it was a much different character than I'm used to seeing you play.
Yes.
I don't normally see hints of vulnerability in your characters in that way. No. I think that we do here. Much different thing. Tell me about the first time you saw this and the kind of character that he is. What was your take on him?
I'd never done anything like that before. I'd usually played parts that drive the piece, whether it's on the stage or on the screen, and this one was the victim. The screen drove him, which is not easy, because you have to sort of just let everything hit you, and you take it on the jaw, and you ignore it. And so I was immediately interested in doing it, and I talked to Robert Lantos, who then said, think about a director. I've got someone, and I could only think of Atom, because Atom is very sensitive, as we all know. He's a very good psychiatrist on the on the movie set, and I needed a friend behind the lens on this one, and I think and he didn't. It was very interesting because Atom has a sort of style that he works under every now and then, which just every now and then changes. Mm-hmm. But he didn't use it in this, and he made the right choice. He shot it absolutely straight. There was no affectation, no tricks, and I thought that was absolutely right. And of course, it's never perfect because the more documentary like it should be. I wish we could have got even more out of it, and even more real and even more sort of. But it was at least the best one could do. And then I saw it. And it was really quite good, actually. Not too terrible, not too shabby. I thought the dog was wonderful.
The dog, it should win the Cannes dog. What do they call it? The pond dog at the Cannes Festival. Yes.
That's right. We had two dogs, I think. One to do the stunt, and the other just making money.
Later, at this same intimate press conference for Remember, Christopher Plummer talked about seeing himself playing an older man on screen.
Well, I was prepared for that. Yeah. I mean, as a youngster, I was always worried about how you look. I mean, it's so stupid. It's so, because you're always thinking, when you're playing young leading men, you're always thinking of, oh my God, if only I had this jaw a little bit up. The nose is too big. That's all you think about. It's so vain. No, I'm so happy to be at an age where I don't give a damn how I look anymore. There's nothing that can be done to improve.
Look for Remember and all the other films on this podcast on your local streaming services, but don't forget to support new Canadian films when they play in theaters. For reviews of new and old Canadian movies, check out my website at richardkrause.ca. Finally, I'll have a look at The King Tide, an atmospheric parable of dependence and desperation that uses an extraordinarily gifted character to reveal basic human nature. Set in Newfoundland and Labrador, it tells the story of an isolated, struggling community 10 years after a child with miraculous gifts washes up on the beach. She's able to heal people, but after a decade of prosperity, her adoptive parents are forced to decide whether her safety is more important than the community's prosperity. I spoke with Christian Sparks at the most recent Toronto International Film Festival, where the film premiered in the Platform Prize program.
Isla isn't just a gifted child.
Tina.
Many thanks to you, Isla. She's much greater than that.
Many thanks to you, Isla.
She was delivered to us on this island on the eve of the King Tide.
Congratulations on the film. There seems to be an element of magical realism in any film that you make in Newfoundland. This is the second one you shot down there. Is it just, you're from Newfoundland, is it inherent in the storytelling of Newfoundland and Labrador?
I think so, yeah. I think there's kind of like there's a rich history of kind of Gothic folklore that is present in Newfoundland. It's present in the literature and the songwriting. I mean, that often happens in remote places, you know, with nothing to do during the cold winters. You have a lot of great storytellers, tales about kind of ferries and shipwrecks and all of these things. So I'm sure that has little by little over the years maybe been ingrained into my consciousness and comes out in the films.
You shot in a remote town that only has 20 or 30 people in it. Tell me a little bit about that, because it's beautiful on film, absolutely incredible looking. Yeah. But if you blow a light or something breaks down, you've got to travel to get a replacement. So are there challenges that come with that?
Oh, it's extremely challenging shooting, yeah. So like you said, Keels has 20 to 30 people, and that's like peak summer. In Newfoundland, that's like in its heyday. There's probably only a dozen people living there. And it's a working fishing community. You know, that's how people make their living there. You know, it's very difficult to, even just simple logistics like housing and feeding people suddenly becomes very difficult, very expensive, and very kind of time consuming. Same with if a camera goes down or if a lens goes down. Not only do you need to get something new, but it needs to come from, it needs to be shipped in. So it wasn't without its challenges, but it's also, it makes up for it in its beauty. And there's a wonder to this place that really informs the film, informs the story, and looks great on camera. So I actually think it was a blessing. It's worth the pain.
It's not just the beautiful scenery, though. There is something that you cannot fake about the power of that landscape and the ocean. And I grew up on an ocean, and early on, when that happens, you learn to have great respect for the power of it, and you feel that in this movie. It's a character in the film almost.
Yeah, I mean, in all the films I've made in Newfoundland, the landscape, as you say, is a character. It's an integral part to the story. I mean, you know, you grew up on the East Coast. Yeah. It informs who you are, you know, and I think in a good way. And it makes the story unique, and that's what we're all looking for in film. I mean, you know, Del Toro has this great line, a story that happens anywhere matters nowhere. And I don't think that's always true, but it's a great rule of thumb to go by. So the more specificity you can bring, and in this case the specificity of a small town Newfoundland, I think it only improves the story.
That was the King Tide director Christian Sparks. A slow burn, the King Tide uses Isla's magical gifts as a catalyst for a larger story. Director Sparks knows the King Tide isn't about Isla per se, but about the community's reaction to her and how fragile some belief systems are in the face of upheaval. As such, he builds a very specific world in which this isolated microcosm of society exists. But in its specificity, it becomes a universal story about the lengths people will go to preserve their way of life. Insightful and unsettling, it brings with it a sense of foreboding that covers the movie like a shroud as it works its way to a compelling climax. The King Tide features fine performances and has atmosphere to burn, but it is in its examination of the dangers of protectionism and self-interest that it's most effective. That was The King Tide. You can find it and all the other Canadian movies I mentioned on this podcast wherever you legally buy and download films. I'm Richard Krause. Thanks for listening to Maple Syrup for Your Eyes. I'll be back soon with more suggestions. In the meantime, be sure to celebrate and support Canadian films.
I'm from Canada.
Canada!